Stay tuned. Don't touch the channel, because today we have a very special guest. His name is Walid Shoebat. He is an ex-Palestinian terrorist turned Christian Zionist and the author of Why I Left Jihad.
For nearly 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have been divided. But now, God is calling for the healing of past hurts and the comforting of His people. Discover how God is prophetically uniting Jews and Christians across the world today on The Crossover. And now, here are your hosts, Mitch and Rosalie.
Walid, welcome to our show, The Crossover.
Thank you for having me.
When I was looking over your bio, I noticed your lineage was rather interesting here, and I just want to share it with our viewers. That your grandfather was a Muslim chieftain, and he had ties to the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, and Husseini had ties to Adolf Hitler. Your great-grandfather also was a Muslim and a fighter of the Palestinian cause, and he too had ties to Husseini, again, the ally of Hitler. And it was an eye-opener to me when I saw this years ago too, that that who you associate with is who you become, and it's pretty clear here that the Palestinian Authority has direct ties to Nazism, to Hitler's doctrines and mindset. I mean, yes or no?
Absolutely. In fact, even the pogroms in Hebron, the Hebron massacre was committed by Haj Amin al-Husseini way before the so-called occupation, that what they call Israel as being an occupation because it's an issue of land, but it has nothing to do with land, because they were killing Jews in Hebron way before. The 16th century, the 18th century, they were killing Jews in that region long ago. The Arab masses would get together and have a pogrom and kill the Jewish population. And then they collaborated right with Nazi Germany, with Adolf Hitler. In fact, Adolf Hitler, with his collaboration and Haj Amin al-Husseini's persistence on not allowing the Jews from Hungary to come back to Eretz Israel, he succeeded, and 500,000 Jews died. He was called the Führer of the Muslim world.
The Führer of the Muslim world.
That's what the Germans called Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Führer of the Muslim world.
Mm. Well, when I was researching this interview with you, I also saw that, the terrible incident in America, high school Columbine, that occurred. Those two kids were also involved in neo-Nazism, and they perpetrated that act on the day of Hitler's birthday. Mm-hmm. So this Nazism is universal. It's not just Palestinian issues, but it's throughout the world. People are dealing with this mindset.
That's right. That's right. Because if you look at Nazism and if you look at Islamic fanaticism, you'll see very much in common. The end justifies the means. There's no respect for national borders. It's to conquer the whole world. And if you look at the edicts of the Omar Covenant even, they were so close to the Nazi Germany, edicts regarding the Jews in Germany, where the yellow patch had to be worn in the Islamic era for the Jews in the right shoulder. Mm-hmm. The Nazis adopted the same thing, and they got it from Spain, from the Islamic world. And that's where this thing came from. And if you look at the edicts regarding Jews and Nazism and Islamism, you find it almost identical.
Share with us, along this path, Walid, when you were a child bringing up in schools, what Nazis indoctrinated the youth. Share with us similarities that you went through in indoctrination in the school system. To quote you, on your website I was reading something where you said, a hijacking of the Palestinian people via the government. Explain.
Well, just as in Nazism, Nazism was the process of robbing the media, robbing the institutions, religious institutions, and robbing specifically the youth. That's how Hitler started, with this youth, and with the arts. So right at a young age, we used to listen to the Voice of Palestine, coming from Egypt. And the arts, the songs, the national songs, the Palestinian national songs, all of them. And when you went to kindergarten, before the PLO, we learned Arabs are beloved, Jews are dogs. It was a song we sang in kindergarten even.
Arabs are beloved, Jews are dogs. You were singing, okay.
العرب أحبابنا واليهود كلابنا, which means our dogs. Okay. And never met a Jew in my life, and here I was thinking of Jews as dogs. Going to the museum, going to the zoo, you'd see monkeys. You see, these are the descendants of the Jews. In fact, at one point in time, we had a gorilla who had a habit of smoking. And they would flick a cigarette to the gorilla in the cage, and he'd puff on the cigarette. And I remember I asked, I said, well, how did he learn how to smoke? And the answer came very quickly. This is a descendant from the Jews who broke the Sabbath. In accordance to the Quranic verse, وَقَلَبْنَاهُمْ قِرَدَةً خَاسِئِينَ. We have converted the Sabbath breakers to becoming detestable monkeys. And from a young age, learning exactly what happened in Nazism. The difference is that this has a religious twist to it. You know, this is using the Quran, using verses from the Quran, the Hadith, to back up
ideology.
Yeah.
The Palestinian Authority is transmitting a message to the younger generation. The goal of life is death. A veritable propaganda strategy is being implemented by the Palestinian authorities, directly aimed at motivating the hearts and minds of young children. They are urged to take part willingly in terrorist acts. Children are instructed, throw down your toys and replace them with rocks.
مش رح تسلم يا صهيوني من بركان حجار بلادي مش رح تسلم يا صهيوني من بركان حجار بلادي انت الهدف قبال عيوني واهلا ومرحب باستشهادي.
The goal of this training is to program the children to be ready and willing to murder and kill of their own free will, even if it means that they themselves will die. The Palestinian Authority-administered educational system gives Palestinian children formal classes on the best ways to kill Israelis.
I mean, yes, you were a terrorist and you perpetrated different acts of violence. And tell me if this is accurate. Bombed an Israeli bank, almost clubbed an IDF soldier to death almost. You were arrested. You went to prison. I think it was for incitement and violence against Israel. Mm-hmm. And you were put in the Jerusalem Central Prison. How much time did you spend in prison?
I spent a couple of weeks because I was a U.S. citizen. I had immunity. Yes, I was born a U.S. citizen. So when I was arrested, I took my U.S. passport, did not take my local ID, and this way I got immunity. So my colleagues ended up getting term sentences. I was released because they didn't want to mess with an American. Causes problem between the Israelis who had good relationships with the United States of America. So I used that as an immunity.
So Walid, explain to us that you are an American, and we thought you were born in Israel, brought up as Palestinian.
That's right. I was born in Israel by an American mother who met my father in California, and she married him, and she moved. She went for a visit to the Holy Land to visit my ailing Arab grandmother, and she was held against her will for 35 years. Not allowed to leave the country for 35 years. So she was an American, and I got my U.S. passport as an American citizen. So that's how I got my citizenship.
Just recently, let's go back here. You were released from prison for 2 weeks because you're American, they didn't want to have conflict, they got you out early, but you went right back into the battlefield. And I know recently Israel just released hundreds of terrorists back into the field. I'm presuming a large part of them are going to go back into doing what they've been trained to do, which is violent acts and be a terrorist. How insane it is to release them, but they did. Versus how few had their eyes opened, like Walid. There's a crack in the door somewhere, and all of a sudden you went from terrorist to a Christian Zionist. What happened in '93?
In '93, I attempted to convert my wife to Islam. She was a nominal Catholic. And she asked me, she says, where are these corruptions in the Bible? Because the Bible was corrupted, the way we were taught. The Jews corrupted the Bible. The Jews were prophet killers. The Jews spread mad cow disease. The Jews are descendants of monkeys and pigs. The Jews, all these things about the Jews. So I had to find the corruption. So I went and bought $10 Bible. It's right here. And I started studying it. And by the time I finished it, I found out that I had the corruptions and not the Bible. I looked at
Now, how many years did that, months or what?
A couple of years, you know, studying the Bible. And
before you came to that conviction that
yes,
you were not you were told the myths.
That's right. It had to be a logical understanding. I was a doubting Thomas, and then I ran into several passages in the Bible, and specifically one of them was Psalm 83, which just talks about the battle between the Arabs and the Jews. The Ishmaelites are included in this prophecy written by David thousands of years ago. And it depicts the Arab-Israeli war very clearly because it mentions the names. It mentions that they come in a confederacy of nations against Israel. And it names them one by one: Edom, the Ishmaelites, Moab, Jibal, Ammon, Assyria, all these. And then it says at the end of it that Israel will pursue them. It says, pursue them with your tempest and frighten them with your storm. That the reason that Israel will win the battle is because God will put fear in the enemies of Israel. And it's exactly what I saw in the 6-day war. And it wasn't called the 6-day war by accident, because there's a Sabbath rest in it. Same as the Joshuan conquest. It was 6-day war as well. On the 7th day, early in the morning, they went around the walls and blew the trumpets, and the walls fell, and Israel was established as a state. So I found out that I was living in a time that was astonishing, and that's the return of the Jewish people.
So you believed what you were reading in the scriptures here because you saw in reality, i.e. the 6-day war.
That's right.
Because normally, I mean, if you were indoctrinated in Islam and you're reading this, you wouldn't have believed it anyway about Israel chasing these countries.
That's right. I would have thought that this is a Zionist corruption of the text. But the question becomes is that how did the Zionist corruption became fulfilled? How could they have fulfilled such a Zionist corruption? I mean, if David was writing this and saying a confederacy of nations of the Arabs, the Iraqis, the Syrians, the Lebanese, the Jordanians coming in a confederacy of nations coming against Israel, I think David would have said, wait a minute, we're going to get shish kebabbed. I mean, this is not going to work out. Why would you make such an outlandish declaration? You'd make it simple, you know. You'd make Goliath kill David, but in this case, it's David winning against the Goliath.
Right.
So it astonished me. I said, well, I have to come down with the grip with reality. And specifically when looking at verse 18, it says that men may know that you, whose name alone is the Lord, are the Most High over all the earth. So this is the reason we lost the battles, because God wanted to show us it was David against Goliath, and David will win, the smaller army will win, and God will be behind it, that we may know. But we looked the other way. We did not want to see God's hand at this battle.
We will be right back.
I'm Jim Becker. I've been a journalism teacher for many years, and actually I wrote my first newspaper story in 1973. And I've seen the world change a whole lot in that time, covering a lot of different stories. But one thing that upsets me a little bit, and this is what I teach my students, is that truth can never be bested by falsehood in the public arena. But what happens when so much of what you see in the media is not the truth, and it's overbearingly, blatantly bad or anti-good? And that's why I was really concerned. That's why I think that the crossover can be a powerful instrument in reaching people, because it's actually proclaiming the truth, the positive side of a lot of different things, and reaching out to people.
For nearly 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have been divided. But now, God is calling for the healing of past hurts and the comforting of His people. Discover how God is prophetically uniting Jews and Christians across the world today on The Crossover. The Crossover exists to communicate to the Jewish community that there is a growing group of Christians who love them unconditionally. The focus of the Crossover program is to promote a greater understanding of the differences and similarities between Jewish and Christian customs, history, and theology, while encouraging a closer walk with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As a second-generation Holocaust survivor, Rosalie's Jewish heritage includes parents who were protected from the Nazis by Christians. Yet for more than a decade, Mitch and Rosalie searched for meaning in life in the New Age movement. But after returning to their Judeo-Christian roots, they discovered God's purpose for their lives: to rebuild bridges between Christians and Jews. Now through TV, radio, the internet, speaking engagements, the healing room, and print and video resources, they are reuniting Jews and Christians in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Join Mitch and Rosalie as they tackle tough topics and welcome dynamic guests on The Crossover.
They're one of the few organizations that actually understands the background of why Jesus did what he did, because they're from a similar background. And that's what the world really wants at this particular time.
For more information on The Crossover and The Crossover Project, contact Rosalie Jerome at 832-287-5057 or visit us on the web at www.thecrossovertv.org.
Lord God of Abraham, Isaac and Israel.
Welcome back to The Crossover.
Waleed, carry on with some other examples here, because quoting you again, you realized everything after 6 months of intense study of the Word. You realized, quoting you, everything you had been taught about Jews was a lie. You were convinced you were on the side of the evil. You became an advocate for the former enemy, Israel Jews. So what are some of these lies that were unveiled? Here you saw some scripture come to life.
Oh,
what else?
Almost everything we used to argue is a lie. That it's an issue of land. That the Jews came all of a sudden, stole our land, took our villages, destroyed our homes, and threw us out of the country. And I look back at the situation, and I see there was 800,000 Jews that were forced out of the Arab Muslim world.
They were refugees too.
Refugees too. And in fact, the Bible talked about those refugees. Even talks about the exchange program. You know, I will pluck them out of the lands where they are, and I'll pluck Judah out of their lands, and I will, you know, he will do an exchange program, and that's in Jeremiah. The lies that the Jews are the conspirators behind everything bad that happens in the world. There is the Zionist, what do you call it? The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is the bestseller among the Islamist world. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion talks about the conspiracy that the Jews are conspiring to rule the world. The Holocaust was denied, and it started the Holocaust. I paid a special focus on understanding the Holocaust. We denied the Holocaust was true all our lives. In fact, you don't have to believe me. You can see Mahmoud Abbas, who the world is clamoring behind right now, who wrote his thesis, Denial of the Holocaust.
Amazing.
And here he is being the world peacemaker. Well, I think the leopard doesn't change his spots. But the Jews are accused of a euphoria of things. And I say, well, perhaps it's the second oldest profession in history. The second oldest profession in history has been anti-Semitism. I don't have to say what the first profession is. But it's the second oldest profession. And we see it happening again and again and again. And I ask myself, why? You know, and I started studying Jewish history. And I started understanding the Jewish plight. I put my feet in the shoes of a Jew, you know, Yeshua ben Yosef, to see how he sees things, how he understood things, and why he had to also die, why he had to be stricken, smitten, rejected, and accused of all kinds of things, and how he suffered. And I saw the Jewish people and the Messiah are parallel. If he comes out of Egypt, they come out of Egypt, he comes out of Egypt. If he is silent in front of his accusers, they're silent in the footage in the Holocaust. They don't say a word. They go into this pit, being shot in the head, and one after one, you know. The essence of the bulls of Bashan surround me as he is dying. And you look, Israel is looking around, and there's the bulls of Bashan, there's Syria, there's Egypt, there's all these countries around it want to destroy it. In every single thing, I saw a parallel between the Messiah, his suffering, his triumph, and Israel, its suffering, and at the end, its triumph. And everything God orchestrates perfectly.
Let me ask you this. I know you travel to many universities speaking to our college people. And what's the influence of Islam on the college campuses, or shall I say Arab money to the U.S. campuses. What should we be aware of?
It's plaguing the universities, and every university I go, there is anti-Israel, anti-America, young people who are going to universities who hate America, passionate about their hatred towards America, extremist liberals, and I'm not talking about middle ground liberals, and it's worse in Canada and Europe, but it's coming here. It is all influenced by Wahhabi money, by the royal family of Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This is why I believe that Saudi Arabia is the harlot of Babylon, because by the wine of her fornication, all the kings of the earth commits harlotry. And this wine of fornication is the petrodollar, it's the oil, it's the influence via the oil to the world. And it's the one that's giving birth to Islamic fundamentalism and fanaticism, created the Taliban in Afghanistan, what's creating all these fundamentalist movements throughout the world, in the Middle East, in Indonesia and Philippines, and also in America. So really, in reality, who's buying the media and who's buying the universities? It's the Islamist money.
The mosques that are sprouting up all over America, and there's many. And if I remember, and I couldn't find the article, but I remember in my reading that there was 70% of the mosques in America, and there's over 1,000 some odd of them, were run by imams from radical Islam sect. I want to say Wahhabi, would I be correct on that? I think that's what I read. Meaning, I mean, how safe, we as Americans, what's with the mosques? Should our guard be up, or is there more to it than what we see as a place of worship, or what?
I remember when when I came to the States, I was disenfranchised with the PLO, with the PFLP, and all these, terrorist organizations. I wanted something more Puritan, so I joined in with Islamic radicals. That was in Chicago. That was in the early 80s, 81, 82. And there we were recruited. The recruitment came from Jordan. Let's not forget, that's where Zarqawi is from, Abu Mus'ab Zarqawi. And Mustafa Azzam was also a professor in the Jordanian universities. He's an Islamist. He also was the mentor of Osama bin Laden. They used to come to the United States, and their puppets would come, their right-hand henchmen will come to give us education all underground. We would rent hotels, we would go to the campuses, we would be training in the basements for a future jihad in America. This was going on from the late 70s and early 80s. And the design to destroy these infrastructures was way long time ago. And it was right under the American noses. It's all being fueled, paid for by Saudi money. All comes from terrorist money, pure terrorist money. They're still here, as a matter of fact. A lot of these people are still here. They're educating in the mosques in Illinois and Chicago. Chicago was the beginning ground. The fertile ground that started the movement was in Chicago when I was here in America. And now we see...
And you were going to the campuses, if I remember, in Chicago yourself, inciting or with the cause.
That's right, that's right. And demonstrating in the streets of Chicago, and going to DeKalb, to this and that, and doing events. We were all activists. 2% of us graduated from universities because we were all extremely into activism. We're here to do activist work.
So to answer the mosques, there's more to it than just going in there and doing some prayer.
There's more to it than just doing prayers. You have to differentiate. Some, like Afghan communities who want to bury their dead proper Islamic way and do Islamic halal meats and things like that. I think you have those. They're just interested in just doing their good deeds. And however, the majority of these places are being paid by Saudi Arabia. You never bite the hand that feeds you. So if it's being paid by Saudi Arabia, rest assured, it's adapting violent elements.
And obviously, America is tied very much into Saudi Arabia for our oil needs.
Absolutely, and this is the ironic thing. We are in a war against terrorism. We can call a spade when it comes to Iran, to many countries, but when it comes to Saudi Arabia, which is the one that gives birth to terrorism, nobody says anything. It's the one that fuels the ideology of terrorism. It's the one that fuels the money, the oil, the wine, as I call it, of that fornication. Right. And exactly what's happening is America is fornicating with Saudi Arabia. in order to keep the oil flow. And we have sold our souls to the oil, and that's a problem.
Waleed, question for you here on just Islam. There's Islam as we hear it, and the people say there's radical Islam. Basically, do they not come out of the same cookbook? Do they have the same ingredients? And if they do, or is the end product going to be any different between the two?
I can give you a politically correct version of an answer, or I can give you the facts.
The facts. Yes.
You know, it's the same cookbook. Some few fringe elements who are peaceful Muslims who would look at the text in a peaceful fashion, those do exist. However, if you go to the Middle East, you don't find these groups at all. You can't find a single mosque in the streets of the West Bank, Judea, you know, that teaches the peaceful elements of Islam. You'll never find it. You will find in America groups who say Islam is a peaceful religion, this is what the Quran really teaches, but you'll never find it in the Middle East. It doesn't exist in the Middle East. You can't show me a mosque or a clergy who's not teaching jihad in the Middle East. If they're not, they'll be out of business. You know, in fact, Hajj Husseini himself, a long time ago, started executing the non-jihadi clergy and appointed only jihadi clergy. And this has been going on from the eons of time. I think we're in a mess right now.
Waleed, in the last 30 seconds that we have, just what would you like to sum up? You know, you came from a Palestinian terrorist to a Christian Zionist. What an incredible transition. What would you share with our viewers? How do we make that happen more?
I think we got to look at the Bible as the roadmap and not man's roadmap. The Bible is very intricate. It has 8,352 verses of prophetic nature that plans out man's destiny from beginning till the end. And as we see it happening, we see that God's hand is in the Bible. This is the evidence. We have to examine the evidence that God is the God of prophecy. God laid it out. And there is no other God like Him. He says, as a matter of fact, He just spells it out in Isaiah. I am God, there is none like me. I am God who declares the end from the beginning. That means from the beginning, God declared the end. And as we can see what's happening in the world, we have in the Middle East the rise of terrorism, the rise of Islamic fundamentalism. It's all spelled out very clearly in the Bible how it's going to unfold, naming the nations one by one. So I say that come to the Bible, come to the Word of God. In it is the truth, and only in it is the truth, and none else.
Well, Waleed, thank you for being on our show, and we know your book, Why I Left Jihad, will be out soon, and maybe next time we get to interview you, we can talk about jihad in the Bible and about your book in more detail. But now, back to Rosalie.
Thank you for staying tuned to The Crossover, a show aimed at bridging gaps between Jews, Christians, and their God. And we thank God that He has brought Waleed to the place he is today and that he's standing on truth and spreading the word. For those of you who want more information about today's program or about The Crossover, you can contact us at 713-639-2888 or our website, www.thecrossover.tv. Shalom.
Join Mitch and Rosalie as they reach an ever-growing worldwide audience through The Crossover. We invite you to become a Crossover partner right now by calling the number on your screen. For your monthly gift of $30 or more, you will receive the Crossover Partnership Pack, which includes a DVD of today's program. Call now or log on to our website